The purpose of this video is to demonstrate some simple triggering features associated with the oscilloscope. The setup is I have a little function generator here, and it has a square wave and a sine wave output, and I have the sine wave connected up to channel A and the square wave to channel B. Sine wave is roughly, plus or minus 2 volts or so, and the square wave is roughly 0 to 12 volt square wave. And these two waveforms are basically synchronized with one another, so the phase remains the same. And to start with the first demonstration, we'll set up a trigger source as free run. And with free run, the waveforms are collected whenever the oscilloscope itself is ready to collect data, and it has nothing to do with the waveform itself. So when you see it run, you'll see the waveform kind of move around in the time domain because there's no synchronization between the data. And that's what this video here shows, how it's jumping around with the free run setting. Then we move on to channel A instead of the free run as the trigger source is channel A. Positive slope. We're going to use the automatic level and hysteresis setting, so we'll look at the data, we'll analyze that data and decide what a good trigger level and threshold is. And I'm going to have 10% pre-trigger, which means that the trigger itself is at about the 10% of the time domain scale, and so you got 10% of the waveform before the trigger and 90% after. And you can see this vertical dashed line here in orange. That is the pre-trigger 10%, and we have positive slope of the channel A. Now we go on to the exact same setup, except for instead of positive, we'll do negative slope on channel A. And you can see the trigger at the negative slope. And then we go to channel A still, negative slope, and we'll turn off the auto level and hysteresis. Instead, we'll set it to a manual at 20% of the 5 volt scale, so roughly about 1 volt with a 5% hysteresis, and we continue with a 10% pre-trigger. And you can see it triggered right there at roughly 1 volt. And then finally we go to trigger off from channel B, so we're going to trigger off the square wave. On the positive slope, I'll use the automatic level and hysteresis just, and I set the pre-trigger to be 50% instead of 10, so you'll see that the trigger vertical line is going to be at about the center of the screen this time. And there we triggered it, the positive slope about in the center of the screen.